Welcome to the Scrum.org Community Podcast, the podcast from the home of Scrum. In this podcast, Agile experts, including professional Scrum trainers and other industry thought leaders, share their stories and experiences. We also explore hot topics in our space with thought-provoking, challenging, energetic discussions. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Hello and welcome to the Scrum.org Community Podcast. I'm your host, Dave West, CEO here at Scrum.org. I'm actually in the office today, which is rare. In today's podcast, though, we're discussing enterprise agility, not Scrum at scale, not scaling frameworks, but really how does an enterprise stay agile as it scales, which is a really interesting topic and something that I think there's been a lot of books written about it. In fact, I recently just bought a book called Scaling about how enterprises scale. So really hot topic, really interesting topic. And because it's such an interesting topic, I'm very fortunate to have in the show today, we've got Tyson Bertmaring, VP Partnership Success at Dyno Therapeutics. Welcome to the podcast, Tyson.
Happy to be here, Dave.
And we've got Yuval Yeret, PST SAFE Fellow, Kanban expert, OKR expert, and general sort of thought leader in the Agile community. Welcome to the podcast, Yuval.
Good to be here again, Dave.
So let me set the scene, and then I'd love, Tyson, you to tell a little bit about Dyno. But so the sort of premise of this podcast, listeners, is when startups hit a growth spurt, the back office usually starts getting heavy. HR, finance, operations, IT, start bringing in systems, processes, really to manage risk, to make things more efficient, and also because of who we're hiring. I can tell you from my experience at TaskTop, when we grew, we got funding, we brought in people that were, experts at scaling at these sort of things, and they came with their own processes, rules, and sort of experiences. This pursuit of efficiency leads to a set of processes, and I'm almost not wanting to say inefficient processes because they're motivated in a good place, but they bring a set of processes that undermine the agility of the ultimate business, our ability to build product more effectively, our ability to respond to the market in a more agile manner. Now, that ultimately is a sort of cycle which can undermine an organization or certainly make it more painful. So Tyson, at Dyno has grown since the time I've been working with you and seen it. And you've been going through a lot of this sort of scaling challenges in a very mindful way. So for our listeners, can you sort of set the scene about those challenges in particular and your context, as it were?
Yeah. So before I came to Dyno, like you all and the listeners, you've worked at other companies and you've seen exactly what you're talking about, Dave. I was in integrator roles, and whenever I interacted with the G&A part of the organization, it felt like I needed to do certain things to satisfy certain rules, certain expectations that were sometimes at odds with what we're trying to accomplish from a program perspective or an organizational perspective. And so I carried those sort of experiences into Dyno. When I came to Dyno, my focus was on our partnerships. So I was very externally focused. And then about 2 years into it, the growth of that was not going to go as quickly as I thought it was. And so I saw it as a really good opportunity to advocate to consolidate our G&A functions, so operations, finance, people, IT, underneath a single integrated function. And so that's where I spent 3 of my years here at Dyno. Now I'm back into partnerships just as our business is continuing to grow. So I'll talk a little bit about those experiences I had in G&A just to give some context to the listeners here. One aspect of this is local optimization. And when I got into G&A, you start to really see some of that happening for good intentions, but because I had this perspective of what we're trying to accomplish externally as a partner-centric organization, I'll just give one example. So in finance, we have we have cash flow, and we want to monetize the interest on that cash because it's sitting there. And so if I could, let's say, pay my vendors later, then I could actually increase my interest income. But from my perspective, looking at it, well, if we do that, then our vendors are maybe not going to want to work with us. They'll prioritize us after other clients that they have. And if what we really want is the best of those that we're working with externally, then we should do what's in their best interest as well as what's in our best interest. And so I really pushed for this goal, which was basically we need to pay and we need to be paid 100% correctly on time. And that was the goal that I set. And it was difficult for the finance team. And it came down to us having a conversation and saying, okay, if we optimized for at the local level for interest income, how much are we actually earning? And it came down to something like $10,000 extra a year. And I'm like, well, just the reliability that we would have with those we're working with externally is worth way more than $10,000. And even through that, it's difficult for me really to argue that because, well, that's just Tyson saying that. And there's no way to actually compare. And so we ran into some issues, but I had to use my leverage as the leader of the organization to really push this goal forward. But this is an example where it's like the local optimization doesn't necessarily see the systemic impact of their decision to do what they were going to do. So hopefully, Dave, that's a good segue into just the general problem that we have at the local level.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and it's exactly what I've seen. Not necessarily in that example, but this you bring in a leader to finance, to IT, and they bring in a playbook that ultimately is something they've seen and it's proven successful. And by executing that playbook, whether it's standardization on machines in IT, we had so much trouble at software engineers do not like to be told to use a particular machine, but we were incurring lots of costs as we grew to sort of like 50, 60 software engineers because everybody had a completely different machine. And there was, unhappy software engineers are never a good thing to have. And so at TaskTop, we had examples like that. But this idea that this more sort of this optimization in at the micro level, and then the impact on the sort of macro, the broader business story makes total sense. Yuval, tell me a little bit from your perspective in a broader sense. Do you see this happening in many organizations?
Yeah, this is such a common pattern. There's even a name for this. In the last year, the founder mode versus responsible adults operator mode meme came to life. It started at Airbnb and Y Combinator, but I'm listening to Tyson and I'm listening to your story, Dave, and it is about responsible adults that are hired as a company scales up. And it happens way earlier in the life cycle of companies than you might expect. You said enterprise, but this isn't just about enterprises. It's almost any type of company. The moment it hits its A round, B round, the moment it grows beyond the 50 people, the founder that is technical, that is product oriented, here's advice from others. You need to bring in the responsible adults. You need to bring in somebody that knows what they're doing with finance. And they're also told, focus on certain things. Let these people run the show. And it's dangerous in your core product delivery organization. And based on what we're hearing from Tyson and what I'm also starting to see in other organizations, it's dangerous in other areas of the organization. Now, I don't think we're saying that you need to be agile and fast and responsive anywhere or everywhere in the organization. It's not that we need finance to set up a new vendor within a day necessarily, or to do certain things like they happen in development. But I think what we're seeing is that if we're not intentional about how we design the services in the rest of the organization, it might become a constraint. It might become something that actually slows the business down and becomes an impediment to continuing to scale the organization. And that's something I often see.
So can I just lean into that for a second? I think that's a really interesting point and something that we often get confused about, particularly in the Agile community. This isn't about scaling Agile practices. It's about ensuring that the system that those Agile practices are working on in terms of product development or whatever is not being constrained so greatly by external dependencies that they can no longer be as agile as they need to be. It's not about adopting Scrum in finance or in IT operations or in as much as we would love you to do that, listeners, by the way, as long as you obviously take some training and take some certs just in passing, but it's not, unfortunately, about that. It's about being mindful of the broader system and the ecosystem that these agile teams are working in. Is that really what you're saying, Yuval?
I'll say even more than that. I've worked with a healthcare organization, an orthopedics network. That was before I needed these sort of organizations much more frequently. And the problem or opportunity that they were thinking about was, we're scaling, we're merging, acquiring more and more clinics, we're adding more and more services. There are things that are becoming more and more complex. There are redundancies, different approaches, different marketing, different clinics. Even in one city, in Portland, Maine, they had different clinics because of the way that they've grown. A lot of organizations are growing this way, especially with our private equities, driving growth in the economy. Their product was treating people like me for rotator cuff issues or ankle issues or knee issues. You're probably familiar with orthopedics, Dave, as well.
Unfortunately, a little bit too much, day. But yes.
Yes. But what they've realized is that in order to work on their company, on the enterprise, it's not an IT issue. It's not a finance issue. It's not a marketing issue. It's a systemic issue. And that's where they start to think about, how do we work on systemic issues? Similar to how Tyson was talking about, how do I work on this system? A system that involves finance, HR, IT, operations. Whether this system is serving agile teams is irrelevant. Yes, sometimes it will, and a lot of time this will be the opportunity that we see, because we're working on a product organization, we're improving it, and then we start to see the impediments that become constraints for this organization. But this is happening in organizations without a product organization as well.
So the point is that you need to think about the whole system, all the dependencies between it and the whole ecosystem. That sounds awfully complicated, though. It means that everybody has to be cognizant of everything. Tyson, how did you deal with that? Because, I mean, in a way, with Dyno, we're fortunate because you moved from an external facing position that was very much focused on the whole to a position that was all about supporting services inside Dyno. So that's unusual. But how do you get everybody to worry in this holistic system sort of perspective? Isn't it a little bit of an overhead?
Yeah, it was a lot of work at the very beginning, and there's a lot of confusion early on. It took some time, and not everybody's cut out for this. That's one thing I've learned. is that, there's some people that will get it and some people that won't. And you need the right people. But you probably heard of Donella Meadows, like the points of leverage in the system. So
Yeah.
that really was what was guiding me personally, which was start with the mindset. And so I brought in a thinker, Michelle Holliday, who's written about stewardship,
Yeah.
and using stewardship as just a concept to reframe what is our role in the organization. Are we here to serve our departments? Are we here to serve ourselves? Are we here in service of a bigger organization? And that's really what stewardship was about. And it gets into like when you're thinking as a steward, you're thinking about like the parts, you're thinking about the whole, you're thinking about the relationships between the parts to the whole, and you're thinking about doing that in the concept of this is going to be continuously changing and adapting. So the mindset was like really important of building that sort of muscle in the minds of those that were in the organization. Um, you know, Another aspect of this was around what you all teach within Scrum, which is around like the ceremonies and the artifacts and things like that. So one of the ceremonies is like getting people just together, right? Just putting people in the same room and breaking that siloed structure where people only interact with people within their function, their department, getting people to interact across that broader function. And then just moving down those different points of leverage that Donella Meadows talks about. So like focus on the goals. Like what are we actually trying? What do we need the system to actually achieve? What are all the different parts of this system? So we thought about it in terms of breaking the work down into a collection of services. So for example, talent acquisition as a service, or payments as a service, like the one I was talking about earlier, or like the IT help desk or cybersecurity. These are all just different services. So they all have some sort of overarching goal that you're trying to achieve. And then you keep going down the leverage points. Then you start to think about the structure. So then what are the dependencies for each one of these services? Which ones do they connect to? Which ones are actually impacted by others? So you start to see a systemic understanding of this collective collection of services. And then you get down to rules and things like that, which is where I think most people start, is at rules. We get there like way after the why is created, the mindset is in place. So I don't want to get into like the nitty gritty detail of how we did it, other than just to talk about, we really paid a lot of attention to the mindset of stewardship, and then really starting with like why and the structure.
From my experience, we didn't think of it quite holistically like this, no, which is kind of embarrassing now, thinking this is a toss top. What we tended to just deal with pain points when they emerged, like whether it be a cash flow problem, whether it be a delivery problem, whether it be oh dear, we didn't have, we get stuck in legal for months because whatever reason. We tended to always, and then we changed the rules at that moment based on that situation, which then had consequences later, which we then had to so we were always playing a game of whack-a-mole. Because of the nature of most companies that are going through a scaling moment, you've got funding, you've got the next QBR that you have to deliver to, you've got the funding partners there, you're just running and you don't have time to step back. Tyson, how did you get that time to step back and think about the stewardship model, the mindset, etc.? That even though I think ultimately it's a lot better, getting that kind of like that pause must have been challenging in a company that has the growth targets that you guys have.
Yeah, that was definitely hard at the very beginning, because I was asking folks to basically do two jobs. One was keep the system that we have today running. The second is let's build a better system. And it wasn't like we were going to fold into what we already had. It was like we're actually building something different. We had to document. There's a lot. Like, people got upset at me because I was asking people to document a lot of things, because I was thinking about not just the people we have today, but the people that are going to come later, and they need something to kind of understand, what's the actual goal, what are the principles that we're making decisions through, what are the actual rules that matter, how did we get to this point when we were designing this part of the system. So I didn't make a lot of friends, for sure. But essentially, the way to think about it is, you ever drive on a highway and they're like replacing a bridge,
Yeah.
but they still need to make sure the traffic is going, and
Yes.
it's a shit show, right? Like, it's slower, the lanes are narrower, you feel like you're going to run into somebody, you don't like it, no one likes it, right? Um, but you need to keep things going. And then eventually the new bridge gets built and it's amazing and it's so much better. And this traffic speeds up, and you don't feel like you're going to run into a semi truck next to you. And that's kind of the way to think about it, which was, we're basically operating the system we had and then building a new system at the same time.
And let's just lean in a little bit on goals, because, and I know that Yuval, you're going to have a very strong opinion of goals. You're very into goals and measurable outcomes and OKRs and all those sort of things. But did you manage, Tyson, get this sort of more holistic set of goals communicated to the whole enterprise, but then people to be measured on that? You talk about 2 jobs. Well,
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's got 2 jobs, but they're measured on their number 1 job. And their number 2 job is a sort of, this is how I'm going to get promoted. This is how I'm going to be a nice person. This is how my review. But really, the most important thing is, making sure we've got money in the bank, or making sure we're, delivered the latest product, or whatever it is. How did you manage to get those 2 sets of goals balanced and communicated and transparent?
So there's successes, and there was not yet. We didn't quite get to where I really wanted us to get to. Um, so we were able to identify the goals at the service level. So we had like 30 services across
Yeah.
this entire part of the business, and there was an individual that was accountable for that goal, for that service. And not only accountable for the service, they were also responsible for the work that was necessary to deliver that service to the organization. Every month, we would come together as a stewardship team, and we would report out on, are we achieving our goals? And the accountable agent, we called them as the service steward. They would talk about how their service is performing. So we got a really good cadence, like, within the team. And then the broader organization, we shared these goals with the broader organization, because a lot of these goals, you need 2 to tango. So,
Yeah.
for example, like talent acquisition, to achieve their goal, it was around the quality of hire, it focused on that. Well, that also needs the hiring managers to participate to achieve that goal. So we ensured that the organization knew about these goals. The one aspect that I could never actually get alignment across the executive team was to include a goal in the company level goal. That's basically around the performance of the overall system itself. Like, what's an acceptable level of performance? Like, 75% of our goals are being achieved on average per month, 80%, 65, whatever. I could never get support that it actually should be a company goal. So we never got to a point where someone in the G&A part of the business could point to a goal at the company level and say, that's why I'm here. They still have this, even to this day, there's a disconnect between what they're doing, and they look at the other goals that the company has around the products that we're developing, the business traction that we have externally, and they have to draw like whatever um, 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 connection that they think is right for them, but there's no direct connection today to a company goal, and that's the thing that I wish we could have gotten to.
Actually, that's true at Scrum.org. To be fair, we don't measure we don't measure our operational systems and the improvements to those operational systems, other than in a sort of like some sort of connection to our broader mission and how many people we're training, how many people are coming to the website, how many people are, are filling in survey, the goals that our operational systems like support and finance and not connected at all. That's really interesting. If we could do that in a more effective way, then maybe we could get more. Yeah, that's really interesting. Yuval, what have you've seen this in a lot of companies.
Yeah.
How do you sort of get these two run the business and improve the business sets of goals to connect more effectively?
I think the key is to not look at all of your run the business KPIs or whatever you call those metrics all the time at the company level, whether those are, by the way, product metrics or for G&A. I think the goal is to identify this very, very small set of developmental goals, whether it is for G&A or the product organization. And for a company, a therapeutics company like Dyno, yeah, probably 80% of their goals should be about their product. Same for Scrum.org. But there should be a certain percentage that is about developing the company. Especially if the company is not, coasting, nothing is changing in the environment, where everything is great. We just continue to operate the way we're operating, all systems green, clear skies, clear seas. That's not the reality that any of us are operating in. And I don't think that's the reality any company will operate in, especially if it's growing, if it's scaling. So what is it that you're going to focus on developing? If in Tyson's case, it's we really need to revamp the way we acquire talent, because we just raised a round, we need to grow by 50 people. That's something that I would put as a company goal in parallel to improving our research velocity, whatever that is, or finding 3 new partners the next year, or COPSs that will bring those partners. You need those things. You need that very clear connection at the company level. At the example that I talked about earlier, the orthopedics network, there was a goal about streamlining operations that dictated work for different teams that year. They didn't look at everything that's going on and how many people they're seeing in the clinics. They looked at that, but that wasn't what the leadership was looking at as a goal. Even if you look at the Mayo Clinic, I think, or Cleveland, if you look at their OKRs, there are OKRs about the strength of the organization. Developing new capabilities for the organizational level, not just patient
care. Yeah. So streamlining to me always means just reducing costs, by the way. But so you have to be very careful with those words. But skills. Can I just talk a moment about skills, gentlemen? So I've recently been doing a project with my son's school on helping them improve their parent-teacher conference capability. And what was very striking from these are amazing teachers. It's an amazing school. And we actually have a podcast on this platform with the product owner for this work coming out. So, but what was really interesting was that these amazing teachers hadn't been exposed to systems thinking, product development, the ideas that we just take naturally. And I wonder if that is true in general. I mean, Tyson, whether it's maybe finance, they're more systems thinking, but definitely in the science part of your business, less maybe. I don't know. But is there a skills issue here as well? So it's not just about mindset, goals. There's a skills issue in general, because like at Toyota, the Toyota production system and design system, very famous that managers, middle managers, one of their responsibilities is to take that culture, lean thinking culture, and apply it, and skill and that kind of transparency, Kaizen, all of these things are just a thing that they do in every part of their business, because they all have these set of standard skills. Is there a skills issue, or am I just a little bit biased because the nature of Scrum.org is we're all about skills?
I think there are a lot of people that should become product owners, if that's what you're
It's
hinting
not
at.
just product owners, but even thinking, like a little bit of systems thinking, a little bit of theory of constraints, a little bit of, it's like those kind of things would open their mind to a very different way of looking at the way in which they work and the world that they work within. Tyson.
Well, on this, Dave, the way you framed it, I don't think you meant it this way, but it comes off as like it's an individual issue. Like it's an individual isn't developing the skills that they need. I think what we have is a crisis of like institution, the constructs that we live in. The skills that they gather throughout their career is a product of the organizations that they've been a part of. And if you think about the way companies are just set up, our government, everywhere, everything is almost like a factory. It's, people specialize deeply into one area, and they don't build an understanding of the broader system because they're not rewarded to do so, right? They're rewarded to be really deep. I feel like I'm a contrarian, I'm an oddball, but it's because I came through a set of roles that were basically integrator roles. So the skills that I gathered were more likely to lead me down a path to think systemically than to think deeply about one specialized area. But there's only so many people that have integrator skills out there. And so I think that's part of what you're seeing is a product of the way organizations are set up. So if more organizations in the longer term are set up in a way where more people build these integrative type skills, and maybe AI can help with the depth. So they don't necessarily need to be thinking about that, or maybe AI can help with the integration. Either way, I think that'll help in the longer term. But I think we're just coming out of this factory age we've been in for centuries. And I think that's part of what you're seeing there, Dave.
I think there are two things. One is the integration system thinking aspect. The other main pillar that is missing, and I agree because of the way people grow, what they're doing at school, what they're doing in their jobs, is developing stuff. The notion of this, it's growth versus fixed mindset, to be honest, the basis of this, and what are the skills that you need in order to grow a system, to develop a system, to try and experiment. One of the things we see in Toyota is the improvement kata, that things aren't fixed. You try something, you have a goal, and you try to do an increment of improvement towards that goal, and you see what happens. And you apply the scientific method to take the next step. That's inherent to Toyota in way more positions in the organization than the typical American factory, biotech organization, or even high-tech company. Because in a high-tech company, the product organization is doing that. But you go one step away from the developers in the organization. And I don't see this mindset. I'm talking to COOs of high-tech companies. They don't understand that their organization is a product, that they need to develop it. And if they are developing it, even if they have the integrator mindset that Tyson is talking about, it's ad hoc. It's not a system of improving the organization and working on its biggest constraints.
And one thing to Yuval's point here, I'll add to it. I think those organizations that don't see it, they see the organizational chart, like the hierarchy of the organization of how they get work done. And I'm not a Toyota expert. Maybe I know you have much more experience with them, but I imagine a lot of the work gets done outside of the hierarchy, outside of the organizational chart. at Toyota. Or organizations that are more like this. And I think that's just, again, a product of how we're evolving.
Yeah, it is a really interesting realization that I had actually, is that the ownership area was, particularly when we were working with the school, it was a real moment of like surprise when they said, well, who's going to agree that this new parent teacher conference system is going to apply to the middle and lower school? Who's in charge? And we said, well, the team is, and there's a product owner that's determining value, but we are ultimately doing the work, and we're going to deliver you a system. You have opportunities to provide feedback on that system through the time. They were like, oh, that's interesting. And we started, and they were like, and suddenly they felt it was interesting because we saw a change in ownership. Not only did we have a team of people that were definitely driving change into the organization, but then suddenly everybody felt they could be part of that change. And then suddenly you're getting emails saying, oh, well, I think we should change this on this report to make it more customer parent centric or whatever. And it's that ownership element that you just don't see in many organizations. I do my job, and I think that creates silos, creates friction, and then OKRs, unfortunately, Yuval, I know you love them, but can just reinforce that, because that's
It
how you're
depends,
measuring.
right? If you set your OKRs to reinforce the hierarchy, it will reinforce the hierarchy. If you set OKRs from a mindset of stewardship, then people will become stewards.
Yeah. I one other thing, and I know, gosh, we could talk about this for days. I mean, this is big. This is a huge, and I'm sure many people are talking about it. Power, position, status, authority, Tyson. I'd love to. So when you came along and said, hey, we need to think of it as a service, I know you were ultimately in charge, COOing kind of these operational capabilities within the organization. When you bring in a person that's got 30 years, 20 years of finance, or you bring in a person that's got 20 years of legal, or you bring in you've got these amazing people, smart people, but that comes with a certain level of authority, power, status, and they don't want to look like they're not the boss, as it were. How did you deal with that, or were you just very lucky that you didn't? How do we in general deal with that? Because I've seen that being a fundamental problem as well.
I think what you need to look for in these leaders goes back to, what's the saying? Something around the person who doesn't want to wear the crown should wear it. Is that?
Yes, I can't remember that. I mean, it's one of Aesop's fables or some such thing, right? It's one of those idioms that it is true. Yes, yes, that makes a lot of sense.
So you need you still need leaders in the organization, because the hierarchy is still important from like a development perspective. You still need these senior leaders to be able to grow the specialized depth in their functional area for their direct reports, even though the work is happening horizontally. And you need those leaders to be the type of people that see success as a future where they're no longer needed. And I think that's very rare, but I think that's essential.
I want to caveat, maybe based on what I'm seeing elsewhere. Tyson has a very visionary look at what stewardship is. I would even say idealistic, maybe.
Very idealistic.
Yes. Maybe more realistic and pragmatic view that might help people that are trying to do this is that if, again, we look at the work that happens specifically in the G&A organization, much of that work, even when that organization is, thinking from a stewardship mindset, happens within functions. When finance pays vendors or collects receivables, They don't necessarily need HR. They don't necessarily need IT. They don't necessarily need operations day in and day out. There's still a lot that needs to happen within each one of these functions. And that work can still be managed the usual way, just with the stewardship mindset of once in a while looking at, is there something here that we need to improve? There's the work that is working on the system, and a lot of the time that work is more integrative, more complex as well. That's the work we need to, cut across the hierarchy, cut across the people, and that will be harder, but it might be easier because we're not telling these people you're losing your people, you're losing your control and power. We're just adding a tiger team that will work on some stuff. And there is work that maybe we've identified, I don't know, talent acquisition. Maybe we've identified that the service of bringing the talent into the organization does need to be integrative day in and day out. But hopefully that will be a realization that these people get to once they see the system. It's not coming from a rule of everything is cross and you lose your people. It's a realization that, yeah, this makes sense. Let's experiment with this. Let's run one or two services that are the most complex, the most integrative. Let's run them this way. Not necessarily changing the hierarchy, but looking at how integrative can help us deliver better value. Those are evolutionary steps that, maybe get to where you really need to be without rocking the boat too much.
That's very pragmatic and a little bit more similar to the way in which we worked at Task Top, where it tends to be pain driven usually, and it tends to be, it requires that level of transparency and everybody have the attention on it. Crises are really good ways of bringing people together, actually. So if there's a problem, whether it's hiring or whatever, that a good crisis definitely breaks down a lot of these silos, which is really interesting. So we're coming to the end of today's podcast, and I said earlier we could talk about so many things. I mean, Tyson, you mentioned the impact of AI. You talked about building different sorts of skills. Yuval, you talked about goals. There was just so many things we could focus on, and I really appreciate you taking us back a little bit, because Tyson and I can be a little bit idealistic at times, and that's that's a good thing, but it's also not necessarily the most practical. So considering our listeners and where they're at now, many of our listeners are working in large organizations. They're driving change to the domain that they can. They're some of them might be working in companies that are going scaling, that are particularly in the technology sector. What advice would you give them about this enterprise agility and GA sort of like connection? What advice would you instill, one or two things that they should start thinking about? It could be around goals, it could be around transparency, it could be around motivations. I don't know. What would be those very pragmatic, very practical things that they could start working on today? Yuval, you started this by talking about pragmatism. Where do you think they should start?
I think the starting point is to find the biggest problem, constraint, bottleneck, whatever, and working on it. Like realizing that you can work on this problem, like we're working on products. Try something, see if it's working. Don't just stay stuck to the best practices or to the way you're doing things right now. Dedicate a certain percentage of your capacity to working on your system, on your company, or on your function, whatever.
So find that pain point, get that support, build that tiger team, that cross-functional team, find that goal, incrementally make progress against that goal.
Yeah,
And that
maybe
will
not even
open your
create
mind.
that cross-functional team as a first. You don't need formally creating a cross-functional team might be a bridge too far. Work on a cross-functional problem. Don't necessarily call it a cross-functional team to begin with. Depending on, are you the COO or are you somebody that doesn't have that power to go that far?
That makes sense. Tyson, what about you? What would be your pearls of wisdom to give to our lovely listeners?
I mean, every organization is different, has different needs. And so what I say is just general, could apply to anyone. I would say we touched on this a little bit. Think about what's essential for the success of your organization, like the success of the product or service that you're delivering to the world, from a G&A perspective. So what does G&A offer that's essential? Is it fast contracting? Is it paying on time? Is it hiring the best people? Hiring certain types of best people? Is it safety? Like whatever it is, figure out those few services that are most important and really focus on developing those, so they are exceptional, and then continue to grow the system from there, to what's absolutely needed. I think that's important. We didn't talk about the Parkinson's law earlier, which is basically, left to their own devices, like G&A will just continue to grow and put in place mechanisms and infrastructure and rules for the sake of doing it. So I think like start thinking about the system from the core and being intentional about it could hopefully allow the growth of your G&A function in the right direction and push back against the creep of Parkinson's law.
That makes a lot of sense. Gentlemen, awesome. Thank you for taking the time today talking about this really broad subject of G&A and its impact on the agility of the organization and its ability to deliver value and drive change, and how those general administration functions can undermine any scaling organization or any scaling needs as you grow and as you add more capabilities and as you have more things to lose. Thank you for spending the time today sharing your insights.
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, Dave.
Welcome. So, listeners, thank you for taking the time listening to this very broad podcast today. I was very fortunate that I had Tyson Bertmaring, VP of Partnership Success at Dyno Therapeutics, talking about his experiences of adding general administration functions to Dyno as it grew, and Yuval Yeret, PST Safe Fellow, Kanban expert, OKR guru, talking about what he sees across the market as he works with organizations that are trying to scale. We talked about stewardship, we talked about transparency, we talked about shared goals, we talked about a mindset that I think can really, if put in place correctly, can really help those departments, functions, capabilities to not undermine your ability to be agile, but actually can help you. There's a lot of incredible expertise and value in those functions, and if we can leverage them in an effective way, you'd be surprised by how much they can actually help the mission and deliver value effectively. Thank you for listening today, everybody, to Scrum.org's community podcast. If you like what you heard, please subscribe, share with friends, and of course, come back and listen to some more. I'm lucky enough to have a variety of guests talking about everything in the areas of professional Scrum, product thinking, and of course, agility. Thanks, everybody, and Scrum on.